Hey, everybody, welcome back to the first Archaeology After Dark of 2023. Yeah, that's right, 2023. And to kick off the new year, my guest today is JT Lewis. JT, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Really excited for it.
All right, so tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Oklahoma. I got my master's degree at the University of Southern Mississippi. I specialize in hunter-gatherers, primarily kind of the hunter-gatherers that we would label complex. So my master's thesis is on Poverty Point, and I'm working on the Fushmaline archaeological culture in southeastern Oklahoma now. And I guess I also specialize in raw material identification and kind of lithic studies.
So, today we're going to talk about one of the overall themes that we have on this program is issues that students and people in the archaeology community face is access to information. The best ways to make sure you get at least accurate information so that you're not operating or writing a paper. For God's sake, please double check your information when you're writing a paper so that you don't look like wild trash in front of your professors. And the best ways to make sure your information is accurate.
Yeah, I definitely think that's really important. And I know there's even been kind of a discussion before that I've looked into about like a projectile point type, for instance, that is actually kind of misidentified because someone originally cited it from a paper where someone was thinking it theoretically could be one, and then it just became a type, even though the original author of it was just like throwing out a theoretical possible. But because some people don't always check their sources when they cite things, they just keep citing a paper over and over again. It's became like a type, even though the original paper said it was just a theoretical concept. So
Yeah, and something else I've noticed is, if you read an abstract of a paper, the abstract sounds exactly like what you're looking for, and then you read the entire paper, and it's usually, 50 plus pages, and you're like, wow, this was several hours that I've just wasted.
yeah, there's definitely and I think that's because in some cases, like the abstract, when like the because I'm now in the process of trying to get publications and everything like that, and then you have your abstract and things like that about what you originally wanted every what all to be in the paper, and then through the review process and everything like that, certain parts get cut and snipped away, and it's not you know like your original intent with the paper and things like that.
Yeah, and it's even worse when, in my case, I share a paper with someone. There's a Scottish archaeologist with the name of Daniel Rhodes, and somebody read one of my papers and said, Daniel, this isn't on colonialization in Africa, and that's very surprising. And I'm like, that is not me. Mm.
Yeah, when so for like conferences and articles and everything like that, I actually go by Jeffrey T. Lewis Jr. because I want it to be as long and possibly not anyone else have that in archaeology as possible. So I don't even go by. So when I have like an author name and things like that, I just don't go by JT, just to hope that people don't get me confused with someone else.
Yeah, people are, especially when I talk to people that are on the other side of the world, they're very surprised that I'm not Scottish when they talk to me. And working on, I'm I'm okay with not being Scottish, although I'm sure the accent would be fine, but I'm kind of fine doing things this
Yeah.
way. So, how would you suggest people go about making sure their information is accurate? What advice would you give someone to help make sure that what they're looking at is up to date or accurate?
Well, one of my key things is, and like I mentioned earlier, you need to be sure that you read the entire article. Don't just take out a section. Or the other thing is, if someone cites someone else in something that they're saying that you're interested in, you need to go and read that article as well in its entirety. There's a lot of times that one sentence may be taken out of context once, and then it just keeps getting worse. The other thing I would do is make sure that since that publication has come out, that there's not been any revisions or anything like that. I know there's a thing with, like, in the American Bottom, for instance, and Mississippian cultures and Cahokia and everything like that, there's a book about it, and then they just released, I think last year, an updated version of it. And so with new research and everything like that. So with that, you need to make sure you're reading the latest information so that way you can fully understand any changes or anything like that that's happened since the original publication came out.
Yeah, that was one thing I was going to say. It's like, for example, say you're reading an article that was published in conservatively, let's say the 60s or 70s. There's a fairly good chance that that is out of date information. Make sure that what you're looking at has the most recent date possible. Like, I would say conservatively within the past decade of the current date, which is again 2023. So I would say if it's been published since 2010 or so, it's probably fairly accurate. But again, double check on your dates.
Yeah, and a lot of archaeologists, as especially some that were 30, 40 years ago, a lot of new techniques and a lot of new technology has come out to help enhance our archaeological interpretations of sites. So things like James Brown's, who's kind of been working his entire life on Spyro, his interpretations of things continuously change because new analytical techniques come out that can help provide more accurate information. And because of that, if you're citing something that he thinks about Spyro from 1974, for instance, that's he's moved on from that a long time ago. So if you're building off his work there, well, you're using that's just inaccurate now because his interpretations of Spyro have greatly changed since that time.
Yeah, and the other thing is, if you're looking at one of the larger sites here in the United States, especially like Cahokia, Moundville, wherever you are, a lot of them have social media accounts, and they're really good about keeping up to date research. Like the one I follow a lot lately is Mount Pillier. They're always doing something and updating whatever excavation they're working on there.
Yeah, there's definitely so I mostly work on mound sites, but like Poverty Point, for instance, and Spyro both have archaeological pages on Facebook, and they usually share the. I was TAing for a field school at Spyro this last summer, and they were sharing pictures about what the research was, the artifacts being recovered, and things like that. And it just really helps people know that what's still being done at this project and at the archaeological sites. I think Poverty Point, the last thing they did, they were doing GPR, some of the mounds and things like that, and that was being shared on the Facebook page.
Yeah, and the Facebook pages have their contact information too. If you're not seeing what you're looking for, don't be scared to reach out to them. I mean, it might take them a little while to get back to you because again, it is an active archaeological site, but they are more than happy to help you more often than not.
Yeah, and I definitely that's really important, especially if you're coming from someone who may not have access to academic journals and things like that. A lot of these Facebook pages or these social media accounts or these bigger sites will keep putting in up to date information out, and they're some of the best ways to kind of stay up to date with the research that's going on in these larger sites.
So we've covered the larger sites. Say somebody wants to look at a smaller site that doesn't have the resources or the outreach somewhere like Cahokia or Moundville does. What would you recommend?
In those cases, I would definitely reach out to if you know the site, you can do a Google Scholar and kind of see some of the leading archaeologists that are working on the sites and things like that. And so I think a really good thing to do from there is find that kind of see who's writing the papers and things like that from those archaeologists that are working on it. And if they're in academia, you can usually go to a lot of them have their own websites and things like that, and you can see what the work they're doing there and find these particular articles or anything like that you're interested in. And a lot of them are very open to public engagement and things like that. And then a lot of them usually have like public presentations. For instance, Spyro and Poverty Point, I'll bring those up a lot because those are the ones I'm the two most familiar with, have a lot of public engagement that they have, and they have open access to, you know, a non-academic journal, but it still has a lot of information about them that they give, and they're recorded online. Their TR Kidder has done presentations on Poverty Point that are you can search online and find and things like that. And I think that's one of the best ways to get out there. And there's a lot of archaeologists kind of have their niche, that one site they've been working on for a long time, or a kind of a region or particular archaeological culture that they've been writing on for years. And a lot of kind of a push now lately is getting public engagement and things like that. So they usually have some kind of, they can lead you in the right direction type of thing.
Yeah, double check when you're talking to somebody about their work, double check that they're actually have the experience that you're looking for. Like, say you're looking for someone who specializes in southeastern archaeology. You don't want to go email them and say, "Hey, I'd like to learn about archaeological sites in the Arctic Circle." That's not going to be
Yeah.
helpful at all, because then they'll tell you, "Yeah, I don't do anything there, and the Arctic Circle is cold and no one wants to be."
Yeah, I much prefer Southeast, even though it's hot, to being in the Arctic Circle. I know that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we do get the occasional snowstorm here, but the weather here, more often than not, is tolerable.
Yeah, very much so. So
But, again, looking at academics, if you're looking at smaller sites, there's also a fair chance that it's either, protected by a local historical society or a local university. You can reach out to them, and again, they're more often than not happy to talk to you, especially if it's somewhere that's in the middle of nowhere. Like several sites here, especially in Alabama, aren't easily accessible. So you want to make sure that you actually can, if you need to, actually can go out to the site without someone shooting at you, because I'd rather you not get shot at after watching this episode, because then
yeah,
I get letters saying, "Hey, Daniel, I was shot while watching the show." It's not a great image for me or anyone really.
yeah, and there's a lot of, and I don't think people are quite aware of them, but state level, like kind of advocational archaeologist organizations. I know Mississippi, there's the Mississippi Archaeological Association, MAA, and then in Oklahoma, there's the Oklahoma Historical Society. And for instance, the Oklahoma Historical Society kind of own a portion of Spyro. So like they're the ones kind of actually leading a lot of the work at Spyro and kind of making all that engagement. And I think that's also a good way for people who are possibly interested in not just reading about archaeology and things like that, but if they're wanting to participate in some events. There's a lot of Florida and Oklahoma both have public archaeology networks that are kind of geared towards getting people experience and letting them come out to archaeological sites and things like that, which I think is a really good way of understanding a lot of the like results that archaeologists get or where their interpretations come from. You get to be there and understand how excavations are conducted and how artifacts are analyzed to help give these kind of information to everyone that you read about.
Yeah, and that's another way for people to get funding for their research is you get people interested in what you're doing. It is a lot easier to apply for grants and other things that help fund your research, because it's something people want to see more of.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, and I think that's even true there. Sometimes, and I'll admit that this is sometimes an issue in archaeology. We get so hyper focused on a particular site or particular research and things like that that we don't keep up with information kind of on a larger scale. But I was recently at the Southeastern Archaeological Conference, and some sites that I'm working on for my dissertation research had a lot of post-napping thermal alteration. So they were heating projectile points and debitage, which is the material that breaks off after flint napping, that was heated again. Not sure why or anything like that, but it was really that was what my entire my poster was about, was identifying that and stuff like that. And there was a lot of archaeologists that weren't very familiar with the Fushmaline culture that kind of just saw my poster and was like, oh, well, that's abnormal. Let's look at this and let's talk to him about it. And so there's a lot of things out there that are not just these major sites and things like that that are really interesting and things. And it's I work on Fushmi, and majority of people, even archaeologists working in the southeast, don't know very much about Fushmaline and or that they are even a thing. So
Yeah, what JT is talking about is, you go to a conference and keep an open mind. If you want to broaden your horizons, look at something you don't know anything about, research something you don't know anything about. Not only will you learn something, but you look good in front of your professors and people supervising you because you're being creative.
yeah, and there's a lot of things I think, especially if you're, a young anthropology student or even a graduate student, by looking at projects that are kind of outside of your own little network, because that opens up different ways of viewing things. And that's the big thing with anthropology and archaeology is that, we're an interdisciplinary study that, we bring in all of these things to help us understand the archaeological record. And so if you're just hyper focused on, like, if you're just focused on Mississippian, for instance, and you only look at Mississippian stuff, well, then sometimes you're always going to have that kind of shared viewpoint of looking at it. But if you go and look at, historical colonialism or something like that, it allows you to look at things differently because you're seeing different perspectives and things like that. And so I try to, keep and go to a lot of different papers and read a lot of different papers and presentations about a stuff that, normally, I wouldn't really, be interested in. And lately I've been reading a ton of Göbekli Tepe just because I think it's a cool site, but, I do know archaeological research in southern Turkey, but I just think it's a cool site, so I kinda keep, reading about it and things like that.
Yeah, what JT is saying is keep an open mind. And honestly, when you're doing any kind of academic research or just research in general, I can't express how valuable that can be. Like, it can change the entire way you look at whatever it is you're looking at.
Yeah, I definitely think so, and I think that's, one thing that has helped me in my, like, academic, studies and things like that is because I actually didn't have a I didn't have a degree in anthropology, and I didn't have a degree in history or anything like that. My bachelor's degree was in interdisciplinary studies with a focus in business marketing. So, and I worked for the railroad for several years before getting into archaeology. And I think I had a very different mindset or view of different uh, principles or analytical techniques and things like that in archaeology than those students that had. So I think both me and the students who had a, like, traditional anthropology BA and now are in grad school, we both helped each other out because they were able to allow me to see more of how a viewpoint like that would be able to be done, and I was able to provide them with a different viewpoint with a different background, things like that.
Yeah, so people, if you work with the public, especially getting outside viewpoints, especially if you're strictly academic, go talk to someone who's in business or marketing or something like that. They work with people and they will be very helpful, especially when you have to present something that you're working on, which, is an actuality. You can't avoid not presenting something to the public in this field. Like, I have 3 presentations just this month and I'm dreading it, but it is what it is. You have to present things to the public again for funding and for recognition, especially in academia.
Yeah, and I think it's just like beyond that, it's really good to just share, you know, the history of whatever with people. I know that there's a lot of interest in those topics and things like that, and the more we get people involved in the process and everything like that, the better we can both, preserve and protect these archaeological sites and things like that because people see the importance of our discipline.
Yeah, even if people don't aren't professional archaeologists or historians, that doesn't mean that they're not interested in what we do. If you do a community event based on history or archaeology, it's stuff that happened right under their feet. people will show up, and they'll show up in large numbers just because they're interested and they want to learn.
Yeah, and I think that's, something that, maybe, 50 years ago before everyone was on the internet and things like that, that we have a benefit. We can share this stuff. It is not just in-person events, but we can share this on, you know, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all these other different social media platforms and things like that to keep people in, to see people interested in things across the world and things like that. And so I think that's really cool and really like a really cool place for, future focus in archaeology to go.
Yeah, that's one thing I've really enjoyed about doing this program is, I've talked to other people in different countries and seeing how they view archaeology or how they perform archaeology. And there's a lot of history that we don't have in this country. Like the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, they never happened here in the United States. We didn't have that.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of different people who I've gotten like questions from people in Europe, for instance, and things like that that ask, why in Mesoamerica did they build pyramids, but in Eastern Eastern North America they built mounds and things like that. And a lot of people don't realize like the complexity that goes into mound construction and soil engineering and different things like that. And they think why did one group do this and the other didn't? And they think it's something to do with other than like those cultural decisions, but they get really interested after they learn all of the the differences between the two regions, and that makes them deepens their understanding, but it also really drives their interest in it to know more and to research more.
Yeah. I actually remember taking an art history class or something like that, and it was like a compare and contrast of like an Incan pyramid and a pyramid in Egypt. Like, do they look similar? Absolutely, but they are like night and day different just because they're made of different materials, not just because they look different. Just the composition itself is completely this way or completely that.
Hmm. And there's a lot of variation like that. That's even like even in, understanding mound building practices and things like that. There's different ways to build mounds. There's different shapes of the mounds. Each mound that's built a certain way has a certain function or a certain like cultural significance and things like that. And at Cahokia, for instance, you get ridgetop mounds that only show up at Cahokia and, have led to interpretations of Cahokia, being a possible reflection of the upper world and being this beneath world that's a reflection of the city of the dead and things like that. Just because one of the things there they have ridgetop mounds and no other place has ridgetop mounds, so it's really cool just to kind of realize, and that's something that I wouldn't expect a lot of people to even know. Like I had to do deep dives into archaeological research and books to know that. So no, I wouldn't expect some people like in the general public to know that. But I think if we shared, like openly share that with the general public, people would be like, "Oh wow, that's amazing!" Like, let me learn more about that and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's one thing that again I keep striving for on this show is to put the information out there. People can see it, people can learn from it. If they don't want to agree with it, that's okay. I'm not forcing people to agree with me, but I feel like if the information is out there, people will give it the benefit of the doubt and at least look into what I'm saying.
Yeah, I definitely think that too, and that's one thing that that I've watched a lot of the episodes for Archaeology After Dark, and the kind of diverse background I think that you provided with people that have come on here and been interviewed and things like that give people a lot of different perspectives, but also allows them to see how broad some of the things in archaeology are, and be able to go, oh wow, I didn't know that about archaeology, let me learn more about that aspect of archaeology and things like that. Because a lot of people think we excavate and we find things and when they say stuff, but it's there's archaeobotany, zooarchaeology, lithic analyst, ceramic analyst, and all these different things.
Yeah, I've recently started looking into archaeomusicology. For those of you who haven't heard that one, that was a new one on me until somebody told me about it. Is people who study ancient forms of music, like they use archaeology to recreate historic instruments and songs and folk music. It is so cool.
Yeah, I know there's a lot on, Archeo sounds and things like that. There's actually, a friend of mine who's doing it with caves and things like that, and the soundscapes that are created within, rock shelters or, areas with that kinda, like, naturally domed and things like that, that produce different sounds and things like that when you're in them. And I think that's, like, really cool and something I would have never have thought about before, I started before he started talking to me about his research and things like that.
Yeah, again, that's why we go to the conferences so we can learn about things that the internet wouldn't tell us about unless we spelled it correctly.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Archaeomusicology is very hard to spell. Make sure you double check it before you Google it because that it gets a little weird after that second or third page. I'm just going to go ahead and leave you all to that for your own devices.
The second and third page of anything starts getting kinda weird. If you had to go that far deep.
Yeah, if you're going past page 5 or 6 on Google, I highly suggest you refine your search and make it more narrow instead of more broad. When you're just starting out, a broad search is great, but when you're looking for something specific, the more specific you are with your answer is really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Like, say you want general archaeology, and then on about page 10, you get to aliens conducted archaeological surveys before we were even people.
That is an interesting take for someone to have, but not out of what I would expect for page 10 of Google.
It masquerades itself as academic information. Yeah, again, double check and make sure it is actually a reputable publication, preferably by a journal of some kind or by a university, is what I would recommend.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely, there's the peer review process is it's there for a reason. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, if you're make sure that what you're reading is peer reviewed, especially like the journal of scientific whatever that is heavily scrutinized, heavily peer reviewed. So the information you're getting out of that, I'm going to go ahead and tell you is probably accurate.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of the whole thing with peer review, is kind of in the word peer. You bring it to people who are experts in that particular field and thing or that particular topic, and they see if your analytical methods or your results or your interpretations, your conclusions, or anything like that hold up to scrutiny. So it's a definite important process in getting information out there.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to go ask people for help. Like, especially if you're a student, go talk to your professors. That's what they're there for. Like, if you're not sure about your conclusions or you want to phrase it in a different way, go to your professors. They'll be more than happy to show you how.
Yeah, I've recently started TAing a lot for classes and things like that, and there's a there's a lot of students that just don't come to office hours. I would encourage people to come to office hours. Most of the time, your professor or your TA or anything are just sitting there, waiting to see if anyone's going to show up that needs help or anything like that. But it doesn't need to just be about, you know, oh my gosh, I'm about to fail. What can I do? If you kind of routinely visit um, the professor and things like that, that could really help you not only, help you in the class, but help you outside of the class. The whole reason I got into archaeology is when I took an introduction to archaeology class, I routinely went and visited the professor because I was interested in things that were, outside of the class topic, but, he helped me along through that and, eventually encouraged me for grad school and everything. And now, here I am.
Yeah, and the other thing is go talk to your professors. If they don't know what you're talking about, there's a good chance they know somebody who does. And again, they're more than happy to help you find somebody who can actually talk to you about whatever it is you're looking at. It could be, the most obscure rock in the history of American culture. There's somebody out there who wants to talk to you about that rock. It's not boring what you're talking about.
Yeah, there's a lot of archaeologists have, a pretty wide network of people that, may not research the same areas as them, but, research things, across the world and things like that. So they usually have a pretty wide net of the people, um, of other archaeologists and things like that.
So we're about done for today. JT, any last minute advice you want to throw out there other than the stuff we've already covered?
Yeah, just if you're someone who's, not a student, but a really big advocate for learning about archaeology or um, you know, pre-contact or prehistory, I would really say that make sure that the information that you're taking in is at least coming from some people with expertise in archaeology, just because or understandings of how archaeologists get their interpretations and things like that. There's a lot of small details like Bayesian statistics and things like that that really go into our interpretations of the past. And don't be afraid to, ask questions. Don't be afraid to, look at different sources and, get really engaged with your local archaeological communities, because having people together that are really interested in archaeology can kind of help, fill in the gaps that you may not be getting from, reading or reading an article or watching a YouTube video or something like that. Your local archaeological communities can still fill in a lot of gaps for you and probably, point you in a lot of, the right direction for getting information about sites or the archaeological record.
Yeah, local museums and historical societies are always a great place to start. They're run by people who, more often than not, have retired from somewhere in the field, but they were still people in the field, so they know what they're talking about. You're not just talking to someone who puts on a name tag and just punches in and punches out at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, and the fact that they're still in those societies and things like that, even that they're out of, the field, either academia or government, CRM, or things like that, that they're still doing it, I think speaks to how passionate they are about, not only archaeology, but engagement with people who are interested in archaeology.
Well, JT, thanks for being here. That is going to do it for today.
All right, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And guys, if you're looking for something else to watch, JT has his own YouTube channel where he reviews different archaeological programs. So be sure and check that out too.
Thank you.